Hello, everybody. My name's Brian Berger. I'm the editor of SpaceNews, and we arranged today's webinar in order to discuss Intelsat's bankruptcy. They filed for Chapter 11 on May 13th. So we're going to discuss today, why now, what happens next. We have a great panel of veteran analysts with us today, and we also have a special unannounced guest to join us at the top of the hour to talk about the bankruptcy. And that is Samir Halawi, who is Intelsat's Chief Commercial Officer. Armand, do you want to take a crack at Samir while we have him?
Sure. Thanks a lot for joining us, Samir. A couple questions, but mostly related to how participating in the clearing process, how that might be impacted by the bankruptcy process that's going on. In other words, normally management can sort of decide to do what it wants to do. But once you enter into a bankruptcy process, you have the different creditors committees who can basically pose objections to the process. Specifically, are the order of the satellites and participation in the accelerated clearing process part of the first day orders that are being heard right now?
Well, I think you should be listening to the order, probably more interesting than listening to me, but.
I've been to a few bankruptcy hearings. They're really not very interesting.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah. Hey, listen, look, I think it's this FCC C-band process is really a really good deal. It's in a way, it's kind of a $5 billion deal. It's probably the biggest deal ever.
But a couple of your investors don't believe that and have been pretty vocal. And the bankruptcy process perhaps gives them an opportunity to object that they might not otherwise have.
So obviously we're working on the basis, and we've designed this in a way that we're fully intent on proceeding with this order. We have made it clear to the FCC that we're going to be accepting the accelerated grooming process, and that's on the basis on which we're operating.
Okay, last question on a very different front. Now that we're a few years out. Do you have a view on how successful the EPIC program was? It was originally intended to be sort of the engine of growth in the industry for Intelsat. That doesn't seem to have really happened. Do you have a view on whether maybe Intelsat should have been more aggressive with the design of EPIC to have more capacity? Or, sort of, can you give us a little bit of a post-mortem on what happened?
Look, I think what helps a little bit is, like, I come from the MSS industry. And if you look, I think when I look at Intelsat, when I look at SES, I look at even Eutelsat to a certain extent, a lot of the FSS companies are transforming, becoming more like MSS companies, because they're going much farther down the value chain. MSS companies basically fulfill the whole value chain, and when they offered whenever they had a new system, it was a kind of a full system, right? It was the satellite network, it was the ground network, it was the user terminals, it was the full service offering. You're selling gigabyte services to customers. And we're moving in that direction. I think with EPIC, what we probably have learned is that we could have, the satellite system itself was perfect. It was exactly what we needed at that time. And today, those satellites are performing really well and are in high demand by our customers. I think one thing that we could have done a bit better that we're doing now for our next generation is having a full systems view, including the ground network, including the user terminals, and including a package, a managed service all the way to the end user.
Thank you.
I guess a question, maybe just to start off for everyone on our panel. We talked about the timing of the bankruptcy with Samir. For the panel, was this a surprise to any of you that this bankruptcy happened and that it happened now?
If I kick off there, the surprise to me, so I don't think there was any surprise for anyone. I think anyone watching from even a reasonable distance could see that Intelsat's earnings trajectory was at complete odds with its capital structure. And that much has been obvious for, I guess, a couple of years now, before the C-band process kicked off. And I think the equity back then was priced for demise. I think that was priced for a restructuring. If you go back to the summer of 2017, And then there was the infamous submission to the notice of inquiry on the C-band, or expanded use of the mid-band as it was called back then, from Intel and Intelsat, that suddenly brought to life this entire spectrum arbitrage debate that essentially represented a huge fat get out of jail card for Intelsat. And then we all went on this very loud, noisy circus for, what was that, 2.5 years subsequent. But with, I guess, the combination of unfortunate events, which was namely an impeachment year and a very vocal John Kennedy out of Louisiana, you had a set of circumstances that led for a massive U-turn by the FCC and the wheels falling off that bandwagon. And that all happened in November. And I think in November, that was basically the death knell for Intelsat in its current incarnation. So no real surprise for me. I'm maybe the surprise is that it took 5 months. But that would be my response.
I have a slightly different take on it, not terribly different, but obviously Intelsat's debt cannot be serviced given its current business, right? And I agree with Giles that the C-band auction was intended to be a get out of jail free card. I think there was a little bit of hope that the $5 billion that Intelsat would be getting, plus some of the reimbursed costs, which will include replacing some satellites that would maybe have needed to be replaced anyway, might have been enough to keep them out of bankruptcy. But I think with the COVID crisis and the additional challenges we've seen in the last couple of months in the industry, that hope went away pretty quickly. In terms of the timing right now, the bankruptcy can really do two things with respect to the participation in the FCC C-band clearing. One is if the decisions are part of the first day orders, there's a very limited time for anyone to object, and it can sort of solidify those decisions so that they can't be objected to later, and may actually make it easier for Intelsat to be committed fully through the process. On the other hand, if they're not part of the first day orders, there's a potential that participating in the process, or even unwinding Intelsat's decision to participate in the process, could get wrapped up in a whole series of court motions and could actually jeopardize the C-band process. So it could sort of go one of two ways. I think we're hearing from Samir that he's sort of suggesting it's the first, that it will actually facilitate Intelsat's participation. I assume that we'll get the results of the first day hearing probably later today. But we hope that's the direct direction that it's going.
But Samir, while you're here, do you foresee this being a problem for Intelsat? This verbal opposition?
Look, I think we remain on point. This we believe that this proposal, when we made it and as it is today, is the fastest way to 5G in America. And it's highly beneficial to the country, and the economical benefits and the political benefits of having 5G as early as it would through this process is massively outweighs anything else. And so we're continuing with this. It was very important for us to, whatever we do, that we protect our customers and their viewers. That's highly important. And it's a lot of households and it's a lot of viewers that we have to serve. And through this process, we're going to be doing that.
Thank you, Samir.
I want to add one caveat to that, is that there is speculation in some quarters that the amounts for the accelerated payments were sort of targeted to be something that would keep Intelsat out of bankruptcy just barely. That's sort of why you came up with that amount. I don't know if that's true or not. But if that were to be true, you could see potentially the FCC wanting to revisit the amount. Even if you cut it in half, it would still be a great deal for all of the operators. I don't know, but that's just a potential caveat, I think. But Giles's point that Kennedy has already used his leverage is true. It would probably take him to round up other politicians, particularly on the Republican side, to actually get something changed. It'd probably be an uphill battle. But I do think there is a possibility, but a pretty low one, that the amount might be revisited.
Samir, did you want to respond to that?
You know, I don't know. I don't expect that it would. I mean,
Sure.
it's called a final order, right? Yeah. So.
Well, you know, in the best of circumstances, it might be hard to kind of muster additional support for the positions that Senator Kennedy has taken. Right now, you could argue that the Senate and the House are only partially in session, and they have bigger fish to fry at the moment. Doesn't mean that they can't, you know, walk and chew gum at the same time. I hope I'm not being too generous in my assessment there, but I'm wondering if folks think that the fact that there's so much else on the national plate at this point that revisiting FCC seems unlikely.
Look,
I agree. It's an uphill battle.
Yeah, and Armand, I think, look, it's an incentive. So, you know, to get something done sooner rather than later, and you know, it's in everybody's interest that this is done sooner, not later.
I mean, I don't expect you to admit it, but even if the amount were cut significantly, it would still be a good deal. But I do think you're right. It would be an uphill battle to change it. But I think it's a possibility out there.
Yeah. Thanks, Armand. Caleb, what else do we want to talk about here as we start to approach the end of the hour?
Yeah, I guess we're getting close. I did want to ask one of the audience questions. This is also to Samir. They ask, and I don't know if you'd be able to answer this, but will Intelsat be delisted as a result of this bankruptcy?
Look, I think we expect that there will be a customary, you know, delisting of the stock. So this is likely to happen as part of what, you know, a Chapter 11 proceeding. So that's probably expected.
What's the time frame for that? Is that something that would happen this summer, or does that come later in the process? I have to admit, I'm not familiar.
I would expect soon. You know, I think there's probably, you know, I'm not an expert on this, but there's probably rules for the stock exchange that the stock exchange follows, you know, in situations like this. So I would expect that this will happen sooner rather than later.
Does anybody on our panel have anything to offer in terms of what that means for ordinary shareholders? Does the stock just temporarily stop trading? Do folks lose their investment? Forgive my ignorance on this point, but
given that there's more debt than the company is worth, it's unlikely that current shareholders will be left with much. They may get a very small amount to make sure they don't object to a final disposition of the bankruptcy, but I think it's unlikely that they will be left with very much, if anything.
Is that a majority opinion among our panelists? Nods would be fine, or jumping in is okay.
Yeah, that's, yeah. No, I mean, it's kind of, dare I say it, blindingly obvious. I'm sitting here wondering though what actually happens to the technicals around the share price. I don't actually know when the delisting happens. I don't have a feel for that.
Is the delisting driven by the share price falling too low, or is there something else that drives the delisting?
Well, presumably you have to notify the listing authority that you no longer want the shares listed, and at that point they're taken down.
I thought.
And undoubtedly there'll be some kind of set of rules around what you have to be a listed company. And I'm sure Intelsat is in the process of breaking those rules, so it might happen automatically. But as you can tell from my answer, I don't really know the details.
Okay. There's rules around the share price being below a certain amount for a certain amount of time, and I don't know the details. There's also rules around the financials being delivered within a certain amount of time, and that's often broken in a bankruptcy process. So I agree with Giles that it's likely to be delisted at some point, either because Intelsat asks for it or because the bankruptcy process violates one or more of the listing rules.
Yeah, when you're out of compliance on the pricing, on pricing, you have opportunities to bring it back up, and you can kind of drag that process on for a while. And we've seen companies do that. It's sounding to me right now that we're talking about something different with Intelsat because of Armand, what you mentioned, that the company can actually request delisting. We won't hammer Samir on that too hard. That's a better question for the CFO. That's That's their job.
I think the question was, why might Intelsat be the leader going forward after this? And I think the answer might be that change is hard, right? We all agree that the industry has been lazy and needs to learn how to do the very nitty-gritty, difficult things that are required to satisfy customers. The bankruptcy process, though, gives a company an opportunity to have real experts who are sitting in all the different credit committees to go through the company and suggest changes and to really make the difficult changes, and in fact, force the difficult changes on a company that it would be difficult to make otherwise. So this is an incredible opportunity for Intelsat to really change the culture, get the people, get the other things done that it needs to go down the value chain and do the things that Samir is talking about. The other companies in the industry essentially aren't feeling that kind of pain. They don't have credit committees sitting down their back pointing out places where they might be able to economize, like Intelsat will have over the next several months. So this is a really opportunity to sort of make a shift in the company's culture and approach, if done correctly.